Well, welcome everyone to our Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2023 webinar. It's a little bit early because Global Accessibility Awareness Day is actually on Thursday, but we really appreciate you showing up today to hear us talk about building the business case for digital accessibility. We are hosting just 2 days early because we know that in a lot of European countries, it is a public holiday on Thursday. So very excited to have you guys with us here today. And for those of you who aren't aware of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, it is actually the 12th annual Global Accessibility Awareness Day this year. So very excited to be doing another event to help promote awareness and actually even more importantly, help you take action this year by building a business case for explaining why digital accessibility is so vital and important for your business. And for those of you who aren't familiar, we are Monsido, powered by Civic Plus. We offer a web governance tool that allows you to scan your website. And one of the different things that our tool can scan for is web accessibility issues. And we're also very lucky to be joined today, and I'm going to let her introduce herself in a little bit, but a fantastic accessibility advocate and consultant, Miriam, whose company is Minimalism. So I'll hand it over to her in just a couple of minutes to explain a little bit more about what she does. In the meantime, I did just want to go through a few quick housekeeping rules before we kick it off. First of all, if you would like to use the live transcription, that is available here in Zoom. In addition, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will have closed captioning. So please do just be patient with us. It takes us a couple of days to just get that up and running. And if you're joining live, or whether you're just registered and watching this later on, we do always send the recording and the slides of all of our webinars after the session. So do just keep a lookout for that in your inbox later this week. And of course, we encourage questions of all kinds. So please do feel free to either ideally drop them in the questions panel and we'll answer them towards the end of the session, or I'll try to keep an eye on them in the chat as well. And I know we have a couple of pre-submitted questions and comments as well, so we'll make sure to address those as well. So in terms of speakers today, my name is Jasmine de Guzman. I'm the Director of International Marketing here at Monsido, powered by Civic Plus. I'm really just going to be your host and moderator today, so I'll do my best to chat with you if there's anything I can help with in the meantime. But the real experts that we have here, or advocates that we have here today, who are going to talk a little bit about how to build up the business case around digital accessibility are Lars and Miriam. And I'm going to hand it over to Lars first to introduce himself real quick.
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine. My name is Lars, and I'm working in Monsido in our product team as an accessibility expert. So that means basically I'm working most of my time trying to improve the accessibility scans and checks that we're doing, and seeing how can we make life easier for our customers when it comes to accessibility. Before that, I spent 10, 12 years consulting in accessibility, a lot of consulting and a lot of testing in accessibility. And the last thing I want to mention is that I also happen to be a blind screen reader user myself.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lars. And over to you, Miriam, and I'll let you introduce yourself and your wonderful business that you have.
Hi, so my name is Miriam, but most people call me Mina. I am an accessibility consultant, but primarily for digital product teams and businesses. But I focus on the design part of it and teaching product teams and upcoming designers the importance of accessibility, because as we know, it needs to be included from the beginning. If I'm not consulting, I'm working as a product designer myself, where I have up to 8 years experience already and worked with many companies beforehand, from big companies to small startups.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And we're so happy to have you joining us and giving us that real design perspective as well, because that is something that is not only important and plays into websites, but all of the different user experiences that we experience in the digital world that we live in today. So today's agenda, we're going to take a look at why web accessibility is so important to tackle, especially now. There are deadlines coming up, and there are things for you to be aware of. We are then going to dive into putting together the business case. Obviously, you can hear from both Lars and Miriam's experience. There is a wealth of information and experiences from them in terms of their consultancy and the different clients that they've worked in and helping them understand why accessibility is important and how to implement it. And then we're going to talk a little bit about once you put together a business case, how to pitch it to your management team. And we will round it off with a Q&A session. But before we jump into that, if you've ever joined any of our webinars before, you know we do love to kick it off with a poll. So I'm going to launch that now. And the first poll that we have today is really just a quick pulse check. And it is, what challenges do you face in getting web accessibility prioritized in your organization? Or if it's just digital accessibility in general, please do feel free to drop it in the chat. But is it convincing leadership? I know that this can be sometimes a little difficult if they're not aware of the challenges that you who are working with it on a daily basis are facing. Proving the return on investment. There, of course, sometimes you do need a little bit of investment into it. Is it resources, time, and budget? I know we're always all constrained in different ways in getting things done. Or if it's something else, feel free to drop it in the chat, like I said. So I'm just going to leave it up for a couple more seconds. And while I leave it up, I'm also going to go ahead and mention that Lars and Miriam and another accessibility advocate, we all had a panel session 2 weeks ago on the future of digital accessibility in Europe. So if you do want to check that out, it is on Monsido's YouTube channel, and I highly recommend it. It was lots of great insight, even for myself, who learned a lot about this on a weekly basis. All right, so I am going to end the poll real quick. You can see most of you voted and share the results. So the results are that actually none of you have had any trouble so far convincing leadership. That's fantastic, because I know that that's something we talked about 2 weeks ago. That is something that people run into quite often. Proving the return on investment, about 33% of you have had challenges with that. And then the remaining of you, it's all about resources, time, and budget. And that's about 67%. I don't think, I'm just going to check to make sure that nobody else dropped anything else in the chat. No, but thank you so much for sharing. And you know what? I think these are really common challenges for a lot of people. And we're going to talk through some of the different considerations that can help you overcome these challenges today. So I'm just going to stop sharing here. And with that, I am going to hand it off and over to Lars, who's going to talk a little bit about what is web accessibility and why it needs to be on your radar in 2023.
Yeah, thank you, Jasmine. So if we start looking at what is web accessibility, it's really something about building some websites and technologies and tools that can be used by people with disabilities. That's the definition we have here. But I also think, to me, actually, it's also to make sure that these things works for everybody. And I think it's there's something that is kind of interesting already here when we are talking about building a business case, because it may be for people who has a disability, but I think many people don't really realize how many people actually has some kind of disability. We tend to think of disabilities only in terms of the permanent disability. Someone like me, for example, who is blind, I'm not going to be able to see something tomorrow, but there can also be all these cases like where people in a limited time has some sort of disability which affects their ability to use websites, mobile applications, etc. Within Europe, we have an estimated 100 million people with disabilities, and here we are talking about the more permanent kind of disabilities. So that's quite a bit. And the World Health Organization, they estimate actually about 15% of the global population to have some kind of disability. And just the size of these numbers, I think, should get people started thinking about, okay, if I have some kind of information or I want to provide to my users, or something I want to sell to my customers, or something, just to realize how big these numbers are should get most people thinking about, okay, maybe there's actually some sense of of doing this, I guess. Will you go to the next slide, Jasmine? So why tackle accessibility in 2023? Really, accessibility is something that benefits everyone. We talked about now people with disabilities, but in fact, many of these things that are must-haves for people who can't see or who can't hear or who can't see colors or who have a lot of different other types of disabilities, they are just also nice to have for pretty much anyone else. You can imagine something like you're filling out a form, you're buying something online, you're filling out your address information, and suddenly you do something wrong. And just the thing to give a meaningful help message when something breaks down on your website, that's an accessibility requirement, but that's really something that is useful for everyone. Everyone would benefit from not only having an error message saying you did it wrong, but actually having some text trying to help you to correct what you did wrong. So there's a strong link between accessibility and just good usability, good user experience in general. Then of course your products, your websites, what kind of digital service you're providing just becomes more inclusive. You can see that as you open your door to more visitors, to more customers, to more users in general. And then I think it's also worth mentioning the SEO, the search engine optimization benefits you can have. So if you think about it, for example, if you have your website, and if I, as a blind user, if I am to use your website, to read your website, I'm using a screen reader software. So that's basically, I have some software that goes in, look at your website and read it out to me. And it's really the same that happens for Google, for example. It's just a machine that needs to understand the content that you have on your website. And that can only happen if you follow certain rules on how to actually program your website in a proper way. So in many cases, it's regardless if it's Google or it's what we call assistive technologies, it's really just a matter of following some standards that makes it possible for other technologies to understand your website. So that's why there's this link between accessibility and search engine optimization. Then we have the legislation. Obviously, it's already a legal requirement for public sector organizations. It's been that for quite a while, but we also have the European Accessibility Act coming up. So that actually means that from 2025, it's also a legal requirement for many private sector organizations. It's that the legislation goes on what kind of service you are delivering. And that's, for example, something like e-commerce and banking service and many of these services that are typically in the private sector. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much for just giving us that high level introduction, Lars. And if you want to dive more into an intro to accessibility, we've got plenty of webinars on that as well. So please do go check them out. But I think what Lars points out, we do have the European Accessibility coming up, European Accessibility Act coming up. In fact, there is a fantastic countdown clock that's been created, and today there is 774 days, so not business days, but 774 days left until that deadline. And I think for any of you who are marketers or communicators who were working when the GDPR deadline was approaching, I think you can probably recognize that a lot of organizations waited until the last 6 months to do something about it. And in hindsight, wished they would have started 2 years before. And I think that's very much where we're at now. But before you can even start doing anything about it, you might even need to put together a business case for it. And that's exactly why we're here today. So the reason I invited Lars and Miriam to talk was to look at the business case and take a look at what the different benefits, considerations, resources, and what stakeholders you need to involve, because they've worked through their consultancies with this. And so we have 5 different sections that or 5 kind of different key topics we're going to go through, but the different considerations for your business case that we're really going to dive into a little bit more is, what is your organization's motivation for implementing accessibility? This is so important at the core to understand why you're getting started with it. What challenges do you foresee with this project? Like any project, whether it's your website or other parts of the user experience, there will be challenges, and you need to take that into your considerations. Who's responsible for web accessibility or digital accessibility? Something we're going to discuss based off of their experiences, as well as the time, budget, and resources, which I think is great because that was a big challenge for a lot of you. And then last but not least, we'll wrap it up with stakeholder buy-in, because that's, of course, also something that we need to make sure that everyone's on the same page when you're going after something like this. So with that, let's jump into the motivation for your organization. And the way we're going to kind of go through these slides is both Lars and Miriam are going to kind of comment on these different topics from their perspective. So Lars, do you want to start about talking about how you've approached with your clients and tackling the motivation for them to tackle website or digital accessibility?
Yeah. So when it comes to the motivation, you have some good points already on your slide. And what I want to add to that is that I often see, if you're thinking about the old metaphor for motivation about the stick and the carrot, in my experience, I often see it starts with a stick motivation. It's usually, in most cases, I see accessibility in teams or organizations that start by some legal requirements, or someone from outside who's coming and telling to the organization there are some rules coming up that you have to follow. It usually starts by something will be painful for the organization if you don't start moving now. That's really where I most often see that people start looking into how can we do something about accessibility, only when that threat shows up. But then I think it can be very useful once you get started, and also now we're talking about the business case for accessibility. Pain is not always a very nice thing to be motivated from. I mean, it can be a strong motivator, but it's more fun to be motivated by the carrots. So I think in general, when you start to get just a bit more knowledge about accessibility, and you start to understand how many people are actually impacted on this, and what can it actually, what kind of benefits will it bring to a product or to an organization, you can start to look for these carrot motivators, so to say, like the positive motivation. And I mean, there are the obvious ones about getting more, basically getting more customers or users to be able to use your products, but that can still be kind of fluffy. But what I really think you need to think about, now we saw the numbers before, like for example, that 15% of the global population, they have some kind of disability. That's quite a big number. And just imagine, for example, if you're an e-commerce shop and that you can be able to tap into the market share as one of the first ones. The thing is, people who need accessibility, they are actually pretty loyal in my experience. And that's to be understood in the way that if you need accessibility, and if you found a website or a product or a service provider that actually has the accessibility that you need, then it's very unlikely that you suddenly go change to another provider. It needs a lot to change to something where you don't know, is this accessible or not, if you found something that worked for you. And to picture this, I found these numbers about the use of smartphones and the market share. So if we are talking about Android and Apple iPhones, right now about 70% of all the smartphones in the world, they are Android phones, and then a bit less than 30%, they are iPhones. That's how it is in general right now. But if we are looking at blind people, for example, like me, that needs a screen reader on the phone, it's the opposite. It's about 70% that has an iPhone and about 30% that has an Android phone. And it's not that Android phones, they are not accessible. They are pretty accessible today. This big difference really just comes from that Apple, they were just the first ones out there to implement good, well-functioning accessibility features, and people just stick with that once they know what works. So I think that could be one very strong motivator to be the first one in your market to actually have good accessible solutions available. Yeah, Miriam, do you have something you want to add to this one?
You've already said it so perfectly. It's really finding the right motivation and not just focusing on compliance. It's really about the overall user experience and focusing on what it does to these users and how it impacts their experience. As you've said, better experiences means better customer retention and happiness.
And Miriam, have you seen any difference between small and large organizations and their priorities at all?
No, unfortunately, I cannot say that.
No,
it's very similar. Not yet, no. It's sometimes with smaller companies, it's often more the case of they don't know it yet. Whereas bigger companies tend to know it, but not actively do something against it. Because smaller companies tend to accept it and be like, oh yeah, that sounds very interesting, let's do something about it. But then again, you have to hurdle again of when do you do it, especially in startups. It's really tricky in startups.
Totally understand that. Fantastic. Well, let's jump into the next one. And Miriam, I'm going to let you kind of kick this one off. What are the challenges that people typically run into that they need to address as they're building up their business case around this?
So as we've already mentioned, like there are certain beliefs people have about accessibility and about disability in general. Lars, you already mentioned it, people believe it's only like a small amount of people, but there are so many more people who benefit from accessibility. They might say that the target audience does not include people who are disabled, but that statement just doesn't reflect the variety of disabilities and that we all need accessibility to really have the best experience. You'll run into an issue where like management or design, they have totally different views about accessibility. Design might know more about it, but they can't start because management doesn't, and they're potentially against it so far. There is like the sense of who do you approach for getting buy-in, and the one you've already voted for is lack of time and resources. If the value of accessibility isn't clear, people are hesitant to provide the budget and the time for an audit, for training, or even just giving a bit more time in development for the right annotations. So it's really about getting the ground base or the base of awareness done first.
Fantastic. And Lars, do you have anything to add to that before we jump on?
I think it's no, I think it's perfectly fine what Miriam just had here.
Perfect. All right, let's jump on then. One of the big topics that I know is quite a hot topic is who should be responsible, which individual or which team should be responsible for leading accessibility. You've both worked on a lot of different projects. Where do you typically see that it should lie? Lars, I'm going to let you kick that off.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Well, I do think it's very important to have someone being responsible, regardless if you call it a project manager or an accessibility champion, or it could be an external consult expert person that you get to help to run your accessibility in your company. But I think it's important that you do know where does the responsible for accessibility live, like in the big picture. But then what I often see is that people don't realize how much of an cross-team effort this is. In many cases, I go out to development organizations where they build products or software solutions, and in many cases they only see it as something that belongs in the development team, the front end team, or in other cases they place it in the in the UX design team. And way too often these teams they don't talk together enough about how should we actually do this, because it's not just something that should only, the responsibility is not only in one team, it's really a cross team thing, both because, I mean, certain things can only be done in the design of the product, certain things can only be done in the front end development of the product. But there are a lot of other, I mean, there could be a lot of external things going into your website or your product or whatever it is that comes from outside that you would need to consider. And there are a lot of dependencies between these things. So if you don't get people to talk, let's just to keep it simple now, if you don't get the UX design people and the front-end developers, if you don't get them to talk together about who is actually, what do the developers need from the designers to be correct, for the front-enders to be able to do their work correctly, for example, if they don't get to talk about these things, it's not really going to work, in my experience. And then you have all these other stakeholders in your organization. You can have a lot of things delivered to your website. It could be external partners creating video content or plugins that you are using, all these things. So you really need to go around in your organization, and I suggest really going around having a talk with all these stakeholders to understand where they are. Do they get your mission about accessibility? Perhaps they get your mission, but they just lack some knowledge, information, or perhaps they don't really get your mission. In any case, it's good to understand where these people they are. Yeah.
Great. What about from your perspective, Miriam? You've worked with a lot of different organizations. What's been the most successful setup you've seen in terms of responsible individuals and teams?
Lars, you've already mentioned it. Without communication, nothing happens. So it's really about, for what I found is it doesn't have to be only one person. It's great if there's like a leader that leads it. But I've also found that the more people communicate, the better it actually is. And that includes having a place where they can all document their stuff, where they can have all the same guidelines, and where they really talk about which team needs what to perform better. That could be design annotations, that could be development annotations, or just general guidelines. What do we actually follow? And then sharing that is the best approach. And if there's someone who's leading that as, okay, we meet every week for an hour, perfect.
And have you typically seen, is it marketing and communication teams that are leading it? I know there's no right or wrong answer, but I think it's always interesting because people are curious what others are doing. When you've worked, is it typically marketing, or is it typically product teams that lead it? Because of course, everyone needs to be involved.
From my experience, it's normally design.
Yeah.
Because they normally approach me for that. And especially if you're in the digital product space or software as a service solutions, they tend to lead that.
Okay, yeah, and I think that's probably something that's super relevant for a lot of people because our world is just transforming into more and more digital. So designers, you guys have got a big role in front of you in helping the rest of us. All right, great. Well, jumping into the next topic, it's about getting stakeholder buy-in. And Miriam, I know we've touched a little bit on this already, but I'll let you kick it off and talk a little bit about your experience in getting different stakeholders involved.
So as you've mentioned, everyone needs to be involved because it just doesn't stop at a website. Yes, we can make a website accessible, but that doesn't mean that it's already ingrained into the website, into the organization. You need the people who do marketing to be included. You need the people who do multimedia, create videos. They all have to have an awareness of accessibility, because anything that's a statement of your brand. And once you commit to accessibility, everything should follow suit. It's not just that, oh, once we do the website, everything is fine. It's really an overall package. And the more it is ingrained in the company value, the better it is. So you need stakeholder buy-in from everyone who's leading their respective team.
Perfect. And I think, Miriam, you and I also talked about that from the website. There's often so many other flows into software as a service or whatever other systems you may be, and that's often where the drop-off is, right? Yeah. And Lars, you got anything else you want to add on here as well?
It should just be that I think it's also really important to look into who this actually is, who is when you're making some contracts for something, you are some product or plugins or third-party modules or anything that you're about to use in your company, you really need to look into the contracts you're making. So if you have a legal department, for example, who is doing these things, it may not be the first place you're thinking of when you're thinking about the accessibility of your website, but just to make sure that you can actually go out to whoever is delivering something that is built into your website and claim to these people. You need to, regardless if it's a chat module that you use on your website or your customer support module or what it is, that you can actually reach out to these people and demand some kind of action from these people if their stuff is not accessible and it is to be used on your website.
Really great point. Fantastic. And then jumping into the topic that I know everyone will probably be very interested in, as it was the main challenge for everyone in the beginning, time, budget, and resources. What are your thoughts on how you typically helped clients solve this challenge? And Lars, I'll let you kick it off here.
Yeah. So first I want to say, when I started out in accessibility quite some years ago, at that time, for some reason, it was popular to say that accessibility doesn't cost anything. It was just a question about doing it in the right way. And that is really nonsense. And I'm really glad that we have gone away from that saying today, because obviously, as anything else that includes learning skills, things that has to be changed on your website, obviously it does cost some kind of resources, regardless if that's money or time or effort or whatever it is. It will always take some, if nothing else, learning takes some resources. But in most cases, you would also need some kind of tooling, for example, to be more efficient in your work with accessibility. And in most cases, if not you're building some new product completely from scratch, you would have a smaller or larger legacy of inaccessible content already on your website. So I just want to get away from the idea that it doesn't cost anything to make stuff accessible. It is something you really need to consider in your budgets. And then, of course, when you start out, it may be much more. Often people also tend to think of accessibility as a project. I often hear, how long will this accessibility project take? Do you think we can make it in 3 months or something? Accessibility, that's an ongoing thing. You may have some kind of project in the beginning where you kind of get up to a certain level. If you're just starting out, you can have some kind of project, and you can probably estimate the resources needed for that project, more or less. But also accessibility, that's just an ongoing effort after that. Yeah, but basically, I would say the biggest resource cost is in the beginning, because it's also there you have the steep learning curve and a lot of things to do there. Yeah.
And Miriam, what do you typically advise your clients when it comes to time, budget, and resources?
Well, it's a matter of, again, how big the company is, what's the product, etc. So you can't really ballpark it. It's just, it really varies. As for the sense, yes, I tell them it's not going to cost them nothing because they need to get everyone on board and trained. But there are certain things you can do that might improve that. And the benefits of training them now, for example, will improve the efficiency later on. So it's like investing in accessibility. It's really an investment. It's not a cost, it's really an investment for a better outcome afterwards. And that can be hard to acquire, or at least make them aware of. But there are certain things, and even in a design or development space, not every tool has a price tag attached to it, or like an investment tag attached to it. But the knowledge is really, and time, the most important thing.
And have you seen more companies having a certain budget dedicated towards accessibility, or do you think that's something that will come in the future?
Personally, I haven't seen them acquire a separate budget. They have one budget for UX, for example. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also a good idea because it helps split the gap between, oh, accessibility is a separate thing. Yes, it is. But if you really split it up, people tend to cut that very easily. And if it's included in a UX budget, for example, it's less likely to be separated. But again, really depends.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point.
But I'm very sure it's gonna be a thing moving forward.
Absolutely. And speaking of needing budget in terms of moving forward and making the investment, we do also want to talk about, we talked about some of the different considerations now that you need to make, but we also need to talk about some of the solutions. So Lars, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about some of the options there are out there to address website accessibility.
Yeah, so if we are looking at some of the solutions, most on the tools part for now, or the testing part to get up to level and understanding where you are with your accessibility, I think it's good to be aware there are different ways of tackling your accessibility, and the first one I want to mention that is really the automated checks. That's typically a scanning tool like the one we have in Monsido, where you basically get an automated scan and get some quick answers to where do we have some of our major issues. So that can really be done by a machine, and it can give you some good indicators on where you need to start, and also some good indicators on how bad is the situation actually. Does it look fairly good, or does it look rather bad? So you can get some pretty strong indication on that. That said, you always also need some humans to look at your website. There simply just are a lot of the accessibility issues that today we can't find by machine. So we need some kind of experts or people who know what they are doing, or who get some guidance on testing to find these other issues. But then also I really recommend, if you have the possibility to actually get to do some user testing, invite some people using assistive technologies. That could be screen reader users or keyboard users, or users of other assistive technologies. You get a ton of valuable insights on what is, you can say, the user experience for someone using assistive technologies. There's a lot of good insights you would get by doing these kinds of user tests that you may not necessarily be aware of if you're only using the automated checks. So really recommend that. There's also these tools we call overlays, and it's I'm mentioning it because I see it's coming up more and more. It's not really something that I'm a big fan of, but it's basically you inject, it's some tool that injects some code to your website. So it's not fixing your accessibility, it's it's okay. It's fixing what is shown on your website, but it's not down in your code. It's not really changing anything in the real code of your website. So it's kind of a quick fix solution that may be very convenient because it's easy to set up. But I see it a bit like, for example, if you're building a big beautiful house, but you're building it on a more or less rotten fundament because you don't fix the issues from the root cause, but it is something available out there. And then I think something really we really need to mention, that is just education, learning, awareness. People are often very quick to start looking at tools. What kind of tools do we need to address accessibility? And it is good to have tools, but if you don't have awareness and at least some level of education in your organization, it's gonna be uphill, I would say. I think, Miriam, it could be interesting to hear from you how you advise teams, organizations to tackle the accessibility. And I guess you're a bit now I'm talking about these tools that may often be when you already have an existing product, but I guess you are more often from the beginning of a product or earlier on in the design of the products. Perhaps you could say something about that.
Of course. So as you've said, we whenever we start, we often combine it with a UX and accessibility audit because they're often very much overlapped. That's again a part of manual testing because we just have to verify them based on certain statistics or certain heuristics. If we go into the automated testing, once a product is already developed, this is definitely a part where development can really tackle a huge ton, not a huge ton, but at least a certain amount. And I've seen many companies use overlays, but I do not recommend them as well, because in my experience, and what I've also tested in multiple instances, is they're a band-aid for a solution that cannot be fixed with a band-aid. It's a badly applied band-aid, let's say it like that. And the best experience we've had is really going to people with disabilities, testing it in depth, and then seeing how people actually react to it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And apologies for the issues with the slides there. I am not quite sure what happened, but we're back on track now. Well, thanks for going through all those different considerations and things you need to think of, both in terms of preparation and also what potential solutions there are out there. Just to jump in as well, conscious of time as well, how to pitch web accessibility to your management team, what are the important things to think of? And Lars, I'm going to let you kick it off here about knowing how inaccessible your website is.
Yeah, thanks. So to start talking about accessibility to your stakeholders or other people in your organization, I mean, it's really good to understand at least that you yourself has some kind of understanding of what's the situation now, and there are different things you can do there. So I would really recommend to start out by just getting that automated scan. That's obviously something that we would like to help you with here in Monsido, but that does give you a good starting point, a good fundamental understanding of what's the situation right now. But then I would also really recommend that you try to do some experiments. You can actually quite easily get to do some of these things that we're talking about when we talk about the manual testing. Something like doing an experiment with your keyboard navigation. Just try to see, can you get around your website just by using your keyboard? That does not require any tools at all. I mean, pretty much all of us has a keyboard just in front of us. And if you have a web shop, for example, try to see, can I actually add something to my shopping basket? Can I go through the checkout flow and actually buy the stuff without the use of the mouse or the mouse pad, just by using the keyboard? Just a simple exercise like that may that may give some good insights on where you have your issues, and that can also be pretty useful when it comes to show other people in your organization what's not working or what you need to start working on. It could also, if you do have the opportunity to invite in people or to make some video recordings of, for example, a screen reader user trying to interact with your website or your web shop or what kind of product you have, that can be very strong to showcase the need of accessibility to the rest of your organization or your stakeholders. In my experience, it's good to have some facts that could be coming from the automated scan, saying we have a certain number of accessibility failures, but really to get buy-in from people, it often takes a more human angle to it, I would say. The situation where you actually start to see other people struggling with buying something in your web shop, that's really strong for many people. So if you can get to that, it's really good. It's a good way of getting people's awareness and buy-in, I would say. Yeah.
Perfect. And I think that leads in really nicely to our next point, which I'll let Miriam jump into.
So as Lars already mentioned, it's really about getting a lot of awareness out and making people understand the impact of inaccessibility as well as accessibility. And the resources there's a ton of resources out there. And we picked our top 3 picks. Jasmine picked, there's a great talk by Clive Loosby, who's like the owner of Access by Design. And they've been creating accessible websites for years now. And he has a TED talk called The Internet's Accessibility Problem and How to Fix It. We can really recommend that one. Lars provided us with a great resource, which basically shows you 10 videos of different users and perspectives, like how do they actually use the web and what type of accessibility consideration helps them the most. It's a really insightful video to really understand how it impacts the users in how they navigate the web. And my recommendation, which is always something I provide users, attendees when I start a training, is basically an article about 8 everyday items that were originally invented for people with disabilities, which kind of opens the thought process of accessibility was designed for people with disabilities, but is now something we all benefit from. So it's a really great article to discover which 8 items benefit you every day. And these are just really a few picks of what we've had.
Exactly. There's so much out there. I know, Miriam, you had a whole list of things that you had a difficult time choosing from, right?
Yes. Awesome. So, and the next best thing you can definitely do is work with an accessibility consultant. Because quite frankly, whenever we started, it's just a lot to take in at first. So having someone to guide you on that way and to really work with you on getting you to the level where you want to be is the best case you can do. There are many courses out there, for example, for upcoming professionals or aspiring professionals, or specific to design actually as well. And you can really start by getting a website accessibility audit, because it can feel overwhelming on your own. So by working with someone to walk you through all the issues and how to resolve them can really help you reduce this amount of overwhelming. If you're more in the end of, okay, you want a more holistic picture, working with an end-to-end consultant who really gets you from including a strategy in your company to how to implement it in a design team, into the development team, and then also in all the other elements of marketing, multimedia, etc. That's really the best way to go about it. So whenever you have the budget for it, hire an expert or invest in an in-house expert, because there are so many companies who really realize that hiring a dedicated accessibility person really helps them in establishing a system and the values in their company. And we can all start with getting a free course online by W3C, for example, or we get training for the whole team, so you have them all at one place instead of having to do it individually. That's a great way to reduce time and get everyone on the same information knowledge.
Awesome. And last but not least.
So, and last but not least, if whenever you have to really convince someone, you need to create a web accessibility business case. They will ask you for facts, they will ask you for figures, and you need to show that you've done your research. So we've put together a business case template for you, which basically represents the challenges and solutions and helps you get key stakeholder buy-in. So this is a template you can download afterwards, and it acts as your starting point for creating a business case in the future.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Miriam. And what we're going to do with this downloadable template is we're going to make sure that we send it all to you next week. We're just putting the final touches on it, and we're going to make sure that we send it to you directly. So if you're signed up for this, you will have it in your inbox next week. And I know we have a couple of minutes left. I'm just going to launch this poll because, as Lars said, we'd love to help you out with an accessibility audit through an automated scan. And so I'm just going to launch that. But while I'm launching that, I'm just going to leave these resources here as well. So we have an accessibility handbook, an accessibility statement generator, a color contrast checker, and a couple different checklists. Miriam also suggested one of her other awesome resources from her big long list of resources, stories of different web users, which I also personally think is a great resource to kind of get you into it. And then I also always highlight that she's great to follow on LinkedIn because she's always posting really great little tips. But I do also want to make sure we have enough time for some questions as well. So one of the questions that we got submitted in ahead of time was around how to promote accessibility on social media. And I don't know, Miriam, maybe you want to start because you're doing this on a regular basis. What's your tip for someone who wants to promote website accessibility or accessibility on social media?
My best advice is just start. There are already some accounts out there, and I've joined forces with a lot of them. But quite frankly, there can never be enough. At least in the stage we're still in, we're still creating awareness. So the more people who actually talk about it, the better it actually is. So if you want to spread awareness, please do. We need all the allies we can get. And if you want to post, just have a chat with me, hit me up on Instagram or something, and I'll happily share some advice with you.
Awesome. Thanks. Lars, anything to add to that? I know you're also posting on a regular basis on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I would say I'm usually posting from a personal perspective because I obviously have many of these accessibility issues in my own everyday life as a blind person. So I like to tell the story about how does both bad but also good accessibility impact my experience. And you're obviously welcome also to connect with me on LinkedIn if you want to get some inspiration from that. I think it's really good also to share the positive stories sometimes. I just want to share right now how my own work life just got much easier because of one small accessibility fix in Atlassian Jira. It's for those of you who are in software development, you know, it's a task management tool you use often in software teams. And for many years up until now, I could not really do any communication with my colleagues inside of that system. That just changed within the last couple of weeks, and that's a kind of story that I like to share because I think and hope it shows how accessibility actually makes a real difference in people's life and in the work situation in this case.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's super nice to hear those positive stories and see that there is movement and progression in this area. One of the other questions we have here is there a framework or guidance document somewhere for future-proofing current website builds against the requirements of the Act. And I think they're referring to the European Accessibility Act. Lars, you want to talk about it? I know we've talked a little bit about the EN 501. I can't remember the rest of it, standard that the EU has.
Yeah, so framework for future proofing. I would say aim for the WCAG standard. That's my recommendation. And right now the version of that one is 2.1, and there's an update coming, but I don't think that will be a legal requirements in like the next couple of years, but you can definitely start looking at the 2.1 version of the WCAG. You could also aim a little bit higher and look into, it's close to done that updated version of WCAG. So if you find that you are in a pretty good position with WCAG 2.1, you could look into what's coming in the 2.2. It's just a few extra success criteria, but that's really how I would start about it.
Great. We also have a question, and Miriam, I actually see you already answered it in the chat, but let's take it live here for everyone anyway, because I think it's a really good one. And it's someone who's a digital agency, works with a lot of clients who understand that improving accessibility is important, but the organizations they work with want to use overlays and plugins. So how can we convince companies that want to use overlays or plugins to actually put in the work? Miriam, you
sort of already written down. Yeah, what I've written down already is working as a product designer. I've encountered this issue a lot. Like whenever when I talk with new companies, it's something I hear a lot. So as we've mentioned before, though, they're just the band-aid to a situation that's really in need of fixing forever and not just at the moment. So what has worked best for me and for the clients I've worked with is just sharing real experiences by people using overlays, and then making them more aware about how they themselves can benefit, which is where I often bring up the curb cut effect and the everyday items, just to really broaden their perspective a bit more and really making them understand that the overlay won't be able to fix bad keyboard navigation. So drawing from an inaccessible point and drawing a connection to UX design as well.
Yeah, and when you share an example of someone using an overlay, is that typically a screen recording of someone trying to use it, or is it a video of someone that you normally try to share then, or?
Videos of course work the best,
yeah,
but it might not always be available. So it's also written statements also work, but the best experience is really videos and seeing someone else experience it.
Yeah, all right, great. And then the last question we've got here, and then I think we're running out of time, but it's a good one. And it is automated testing able to robustly test, for example, navigation and menus? And are skip to navigation and keyboard shortcuts useful to users who are disabled? And Lars, maybe you want to speak a little bit to your own experience, as you mentioned you often do on LinkedIn on this.
Yeah, so the first one was if the automated test would check for navigation, and the short answer would be no, not all part of it, at least. Something like the navigation menus, in many cases you could have, for example, layers in your menu that would open when you click on certain items. These things are usually not really tested by automated checks. That's really the type of thing that I would recommend that you get a human to look at for you. And the other one was about if the skip navigation and these things are good for users. Yes, they are. They are there for good reason. Imagine you are, we are talking about keyboard users sometimes, but the keyboard navigation, there are users with mobility impairments who cannot use their hands or who are paralyzed in most of the body. There are, for example, people navigating the computer by using their tongue, pressing small buttons inside of their mouth with the tongue because they can't move anything, any other parts of their body. and they are communicating like with a computer, like the keyboard. So that's why we need the keyboard navigation. And imagine you're this person and you have a menu with like 50 links in your menu, and you have to tap through all of these links, pressing with your tongue in your mouth, the small button to actually do the navigation. Or you could choose just to click on the skip navigation link and jump right to the content. So that's why we have these things. Many people think they are for screen reader users. Blind people like me, I don't use skip navigation links that much because my screen reader can use other means of navigation, heading structures, etc. But for keyboard users and people with mobility impairments, it's definitely a good idea to have these skip links in place.
Great answer. Thank you so much, Lars. And thank you, Miriam, as well, because with that, we're out of time, and I have put our information here as well. Again, please do feel free to add us on LinkedIn. If you answered our poll and are interested in a free scan, we will make sure to follow up with you. And I just want to say a really big thank you, Miriam, for once again joining us. And thank you, Lars, as well. And wishing everyone 2 days early a very happy Global Accessibility Awareness Day. And we really hope that you will help us in continuing to spread this message, communicating with the other departments in your organization, and making the world a little bit more accessible, one little bit at a time. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.